wise a choice as all of you have made to come hear the speaker, and it is my great happiness that I'm not actually in charge of anything here. I'm handing off to our wonderful colleague, Charles Wilkinson. Charles Wilkinson will be introducing the speaker. Charles Wilkinson, I would like to call to your attention, is the co-founder of the Center of the American West, and the person who, when I was discouraged and said that this was more trouble than it was worth to found a center, it was Charles Wilkinson who stuck with it and created the Center of the American West. And since I now have the best job on the planet at the Center of the American West, I've said to Charles on many occasions, he's a very accomplished law professor and has done the Lord's work in all kinds of ways and issues involving natural resources law and Indian law. But as I've said to him, if I did what I should do, I would write him a thank you note every day of the year. And every day he would go to the mailbox and find a thank you note. I don't actually get around to doing that, but since he was the one who suggested we bring Jim Enote and is the person who made this evening possible, I have a thank you note I would like to present to Charles Wilkinson. And it is not when you get up today. Charles Wilkinson.
Who was that crazy lady in Lyme?
That's right. You might point out that there's a couple more seats here for older people.
There are a few more seats up here for older people if they would want them. You are disqualified. Yes, thank you all for coming out tonight, and I do think you will enjoy this evening. The Center of the American West series on modern Indian identity explores one of the most intriguing and inspiring subjects in the contemporary West. All the voices in the series are those of Native people telling part of their own individual and compelling stories. One reason this matter is so compelling is that for generations, official federal policy was forced assimilation, an attempt to wring the Indianness out of Native people. In the renewal that so distinguishes Indian country today, Indian people themselves overturned the policy of assimilation and have, as a result, created a freedom to find their own truest pathways by drawing upon their traditional worlds and the outside world in ways that they choose. We saw a small but revealing slice today of the creativity inherent in modern Indian identity when the Native American Law Students Association hosted our guest, a traditional Southwestern farmer, at a lunch of pizza with a topping of green chilies. The people of Zuni, who speak a linguistic isolate related to no other language, have lived on the Colorado Plateau for thousands of years. Today, the tribe holds a reservation of more than 400,000 acres in their ancestral landscape west of Gallup. The western border of Zuni is the Arizona line. Traditionally, the Zuni irrigated 10 to 12,000 acres and grew chilies, corn, beans, onions, and cilantro. They dry farmed much of this land. The Zuni are among the world's finest practitioners of that art of making the most of raindrops and knowledge of the soil and plants. When the Bureau of Indian Affairs moved in during the 1880s, it had a much better idea. What the Zunis needed was a modern irrigation system complete with dams, reservoirs, head gates, and canals. A half a century of Bureau management wrecked the landscape, and the Zunis' elaborate relationship with the soil and the plants. Over time, Zuni leaders worked hard and effectively to bring back the original balance. One of them is Jim Enote, who grew up traditional, earned a degree in agricultural science at New Mexico State, and has always been passionate about land health. He went to Rio de Janeiro for the 1992 Earth Summit. There he found a language that he believed bridged Anglo and Native values and practices, biodiversity protection, and sustainability. He also met indigenous peoples from around the world and whose tribes had been subject to the same traumas to the land as the Zuni. The experience at Rio spurred him on in his conservation work at the tribal, regional, national, and international levels. Today, the Zunis choose to use both traditional knowledge of the land and sustainable practices, as well as management notions from the majority society. But the traditional way is the anchor. As Jim puts it, the universe of the Zuni is interpreted much differently than the perceptions of nature experienced by non-Zuni. The web of Zuni knowledge and reverence that holds the universe together is based on clandestine systems of ceremony and ritual that are sacred to us and inaccessible to the uninitiated. It is vital to understand how belief is the fulcrum for action for Zuni land use and management, and modern capabilities are just tools for implementation. The tribe has also revitalized traditional farming practices. It is here that their belief system comes in. The relationships to plants and agriculture is at the heart of what it means to be Zuni. Everything, Jim says, comes from seeds. The old food crops and their seeds get loving care. In addition, the Zuni collect from surrounding terrain all manner of seeds, teas, pines, rabbit brush, native grasses, and others. They distribute those seeds around the pueblo. Some go to box gardens worked by elders. Some go into a seed bank. Some of the growth is used for food, some for medicines, others for sacred ceremonies. Why go to all of this work? In a thought once so simple and complex, Jim explains that our belief is that we have that responsibility to the land and the people. This is only a quick summary of one aspect of Jim's identity, of his giant mind. We will learn much more tonight, and perhaps in future times, as we read Jim's written words. For my part, I want to add personally that apart from all his formal accomplishments, Jim is a warm, steadfast, humorous, and uplifting person, and I count it among my life's highest blessings to be walking the same trail with him as a colleague and a dear friend. Please give Jim Enote a great CU welcome.
Let's see. I don't know. If I put this on, I think I'm going to have to do some kind of a sham wow. So maybe I should put this on.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. How does it work? I think this button means on or off.
There's usually that little switch there, the green light.
Okay. No. Don't look. Stop staring. How's that? Thank you very much, Charles. Geez, you took that blood brother thing seriously. Well, geez, there's a lot of things to talk about, and I thought I wouldn't have enough juice left for tonight. I was speaking today and spoke today at the law school at lunch, and then did some work, and then they fed me again, and I'm full and I'm sleepy, but I think you're all energizing me. You know, that. It was nice to eat something different than like some warm-up burritos at the convenience store in Zuni. You know, there's something out of the two basic food groups of Zuni, which is sugar and lard. So it's a nice change having like trout, and had some sushi today. And it's, wow, something different. So yeah, I was talking this morning, this afternoon, and so what am I going to talk about now? Indian identity. And I'm just going to ad lib. And I started taking some notes, and I thought, oh, screw it, I'm not going to follow it anyway. And I get lost, and so I guess the best thing to do is to just do some rambling, anecdotal kind of things. And I think maybe you might relate to that too. But I want to tell Patty that, damn it, I have the best damn job in the universe. I'm the director of the Ashwi Awan Museum and Heritage Center, which is really unlike many other museums or tribal museums. It's a eco-museum. It's a by and for the people kind of a museum, and it breaks out of the it breaks out of the paradigm of tribal museums that are more about like, come learn about us. It doesn't have an economic, I guess, root to it. It's more like, well, let's reflect on ourselves, our past. Let's reflect on the future. It's a forum for dialogue and confronting difficult things. And we're a museum and heritage center that is a 501c3. It's a not-profit. It's an NGO on the reservation, and I can only think of maybe one or two other tribal museums in the whole country that are not part of a tribal government. And we set it up that way, myself and a few others, to insulate ourselves from tribal politics and changes in priorities and harebrained ideas. And it's worked very well for us. However, I have to raise money to make things happen, but I like it that way. It's fine. And it is the best goddamn job. It is. So, thinking about identity, geez, when I'm at home, I don't wear this cool hat. And my mom would say, gee, you're finally wearing a shirt that buttons up. And at home, people would say, oh, that's Jim, he's got that old truck with almost 300,000 miles on it and that goofy dog, and he's a pretty good farmer. And it's the kind of place at home where almost everybody lives within a mile of every living relative and dead relative. And that makes me the family bail bondsman and loan shark and chauffeur and that sort of thing. But it's a place where I can go next door and ask my aunts or my cousins or my sister and say, can you cook dinner tonight? It's a place where I can ask my nephews, let's go get some wood, I need some help. Or can you help me lift this or that, and I need some help with something. So it's good in that way. It's also a place where I can greet my friends and I can talk with Chet and the family and say, "Koton sunak kenan ke?" And we don't think about, are you Native American? Are you American Indian? Are you indigenous? Shit, I don't care. I'm just Zuni. I'm Shiwi. So it's just it's just Zuniness, you know. It's defined. Identity is just defined by where we are, by our traditions, our practices, language. We're just Shiwi. We're Zuni. So I don't worry about that too much. But when I come outside of there, when I'm here or I'm at the airport, I get kind of self-conscious and I think, oh crap, there's a lot of white people here. and I think, oh, they're all looking at me somehow. and I get self-conscious, and then people ask me, are you Native American? Yeah. Are you Cherokee? No. Are you Sioux? No. Are you Navajo? No. Oh. I say I'm Zuni, and they say, oh, okay. But there's the, I guess, the identity in terms of where I'm at home, and I'm just Zuni. I'm Shiwi. I'm Utsanakwe. I'm Gyatnakwe. I'm defined on those terms. But when I go out, it's a different thing. Then I start to think, what are other people thinking? And maybe I shouldn't think that. And I remember when I was at a friend's in Gainesville, Florida, and there was this blonde-haired woman in an elevator, and I was speaking at the university there. My friends are architectural professors there. But this woman came in, and she looked at me, and I pushed the button. I think it was the 6th floor or something, and she said, "Are you Native American?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I can tell." And I said, "Why?" She said, "The hair." Okay. And she said, "I'm part Cherokee." And I said, "Oh, I could tell." Yeah. The hair. The hair. Yeah, there's that side. You know, I think too about not, I guess, modern Indian identity in today's terms, right? And today's terms, there's a legal definition. There's people thinking about blood quantums. There's people who are thinking about what you look like. There's a definition by language. All these sorts of things. And it gets confusing. You know, I wonder about it, and I think about, well, what about a long, long time ago? The Ashwi Enote. In fact, my last name it's spelled E-N-O-T-E, but it's pronounced Enote. And Chet, what does that mean?
Long time ago.
A long time ago. That's my straight man. Long time ago. And actually it was my great-grandfather's name, was Enote. That was just his name. And you know, back then, people didn't have first and last names. It was just some name. And when he went to school in Phoenix, because there wasn't a high school in Zuni, but when he went to school in Phoenix, they asked him what his name was, and he told them his Zuni name, and they said, oh, that ain't going to work. So they asked him, well, what's your father's name? And he said, Enote. So they said, E-N-O-T-E. And your first name will be Frederick. Then being very creative, he named my father Frederick also. He and my mom. And I don't know where Jim comes from. But the Ashwi Enote, the people from a long time ago, when it came to their identity, I'm sure they were thinking about, well, we are certain people, we have an identity as well. And they put their clan symbols and their names on rocks, and they told other people, I'm this clan, Hotoakwe or something. They would tell, I'm this clan, or I'm from here, I'm from there. And when they got maybe, these villages, all throughout the Colorado Plateau would be on these villages, and then I think the identity of themselves were, at some point they'd say, you don't relate to things the same way I do. I think we have a different identity about the world, relating to the world. And I think these people sometimes get pissed off and say, screw you guys, we're going to go on the other side of the mountain, or we're going to go down the river, or another side of the valley, and we're going to start a new village. Otherwise, we'd be all one people. We'd be all one large prevalent group of people. But at some point, I think people just really had a sense of identity and said, no, we don't see things the same way. We relate to things differently, a different identity. And so they moved on, and I think at that time, people had the privilege and the liberty of being able to move down the river, or on the other side of the mountain, or down the canyon. But today, now we have these reservations. And when tribal governments or people are at odds with each other, and they say screw you, all they can do is say screw you. They don't have that. We don't have that liberty to say we're going to move down the canyon or down the river. Now we're on the reservations, and it creates a kind of pressure cooker. And so that's if you're a student or a scholar of tribal governments and tribal laws, things like that. Man, being on the reservation or some of these places, we just don't have those liberties anymore to move around like we used to. That would have been a natural way of dealing with some of these things, I think. We would have said, I'm through arguing with you. I'm not going to fight with you. We're just going to move the family, or we got a group of people, and we're going to move down the road, down the canyon, and start a new village, and we might even start a new language. Who knows? But times are different now, and so here we are. I was talking with some friends recently about how even when we're trying to come to terms with identity, and at the museum where I work in Zuni, we're always working with kids about what was the past like, what's our present like, and what's the future going to be like. And we have some kids sometimes come in and say, well, I heard Zunis do this and we do that. And I say, well, where did you hear that from? And they'd say, well, we made a field trip to Mesa Verde. And I said, really? They said that there? Yeah. And I said, well, that ain't true. And in our work, we've been visiting other museums in different parts of the world, from Cambridge University in England to the Museum of Ethnology in Osaka, Japan. But we're looking at collections of objects there. And what we're finding is about 80% of catalog descriptions are inaccurate. And why that's important, and why I see the interest in it for Zuni, is because Zuni people visit these places, maybe not Osaka anytime soon, but people go to National Museum of American Indian, or people go to the Denver Art Museum, or people go to different museums in the region, and they get wrong information. And they come back and they say, we are this way, and then we tell them, and I tell them, no, we're not. So it's in our interest to help set the record straight. And so we've been doing something with museums that we call creating collaborative catalogs. And I'll tell you right now, I had this real simple, just had a couple of images up there, and I was going to ramble on tonight. But at dinner, some very influential people kicked me and said, you better talk about the map art. No, they didn't kick me. You better talk about the map artwork that you do, and talk about the collections interpretation you're doing. So I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to tell you a little crazy story too about a sense that I've gotten recently about how important it is to maintain, I guess, in Zuni there's an overwhelming responsibility for conformity. And this plays into identity as well. But when I'm at home, I try to keep a low profile. I don't tell people I went to Boulder and ate sushi or anything like that, because they would just roll their eyes and maybe beat me up or something. It's like when you see kids riding a helmet, wearing a bicycle, and kids gang up and beat them up and say, hey, safety kid, But there's this requirement for conformity. And where this really hits home is when I was little, me and my cousins and others, we'd be playing some stupid games, I don't know, with cars or whatever it was, and we'd say something about Spain. And my grandmother would be always wood stove. She'd always be stirring some chili and oil or something, always stirring chili and squash and with her apron, and she'd hear us and she'd go across that little dance floor. Oh, the Queen of Spain is nice. And we say, yeah. All right, yeah, Grandma. And we play some other games and something else. And a couple of years later, I don't know, out of the blue, somebody would say, oh, something England. And she'd always stirring, always cooking, stirring something. And she'd say, I like England. And we, oh, okay, Grandma. This is Moot Daisy, my grandma Daisy. And then some years later, again, we'd bring up something and talk, and we'd say something about China, and she'd, again, oh, China, yeah, I like China. And then one day, we were at home, and there was a whole bunch of people, a big family. But I remember this white lady came to the house, and all us kids were like, oh shit, bumping into each other. There's a white lady at the house. So somebody answered the door. And so we were all running around, and finally one of my aunts, like, oh, what do you want? And she said, I'm writing a book about your grandma. I'm writing a story about Daisy, my grandma. And we said, well, my aunt said, well, why? Kind of like, it's just her mom. She said, well, there's an interesting story. That you know her story, don't you? And no. Can I come in? And this is still like through the screen door. And like, okay. So she came in and she had some binders with her. And then we all kind of came out from where we were hiding. And she laid them out. And she said, well, talking to the kids, us, and she said, your grandma, when she was at First Mesa, on my mom's side, my mother is from First Mesa out of Hopi. And this lady said, her name, by the way, was Anita Baldwin. I don't know if you ever heard of Baldwin Hills or Santa Anita Racetrack in the Los Angeles area. But a woman with resources, let's put it that way. And she was sponsoring an archaeological dig at Hopi. And at the time, my grandmother was having problems with her eyes, some kind of like a glaucoma or something happening, and she was going blind. And so this woman, Anita Baldwin, said, well, this woman said that Anita Baldwin met my grandmother's parents and said, I would like to take Daisy back to California and have her eyes treated. There's some new procedures that can be done to help let her see again. And they said, okay, and they let her go. And so next thing she knew, she was on, this woman from First Mesa to Hopi was on a train and going to California. And so this woman then said, and here's a picture of your grandma. And I think it was like, I forget, late 1920s or something. And it was my grandma in like a flapper outfit, playing a violin with a fountain in the background. And they said, this is her at, how big mansions have a name. They don't just say home, it's something, like Taliesin West or something. This is her at something, that mansion. And we said, no way. And we looked at Grandma, her? Yeah, and she was still stirring something. And they said, yeah, the woman said, yeah. And she said, and then after her eyes were treated, the woman asked for her to join her on some travels. And they ended up traveling around the world. And this woman had connections with royalty and things like that. And we were all, oh, sorry, Grandma. But, and then this woman turned her binder, and there was a picture of my grandma. They said, well, this is her, and there was a picture. She was wearing a white smock, and she was chiseling some marble. And she said, well, this is Daisy when she was at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And I thought, what the hell? Her? She's still stirring. What? Copy. She was like, what? And they said, yeah, her art was recognized, and so this woman enrolled her in art school in Paris, like this really fancy art school. And then my aunt and my mom were saying, remember that trunk and those shoes that we used to play with? Oh, then it all started coming together. But my grandma never talked about this stuff. She never said a thing about it. And then it's like one of those, again, we always have these sort of epiphanies and I remember my grandma is just always, the old ladies would come over to the house and they'd sing songs, and it was such a high pitch we used to have to leave because and they'd sing songs and they'd joke and gossip and talk about their old boyfriends and stuff. But that's how I remember my grandma, just that. Feeding pigs and her chickens and making pottery and cooking. But she never said anything about meeting the Queen of Spain. And she said, oh, that marble piece, she said, oh, I gave it to the King of Malaysia or something like that. But she never said anything like that. You know how many people, us maybe, we would say, oh yeah, well, the time I was in Paris, name drop these kind of things. But she knew that in her setting, and pertaining to the identity of where she's at in Zuni, with her people, her peers, her friends, to say something like that would have been like, wouldn't have been cool. She would have been seen as just an outsider, and so she just kept it to herself. But I can tell she wasn't tormented. She was just kind of like, I've been there and done that, but my life is here and right now, and what's going to happen in the future. And that was just an experience, a short period of life in her life. But that meant a lot to me about identity. It was right at that moment in her setting, in her time, and she didn't make a big deal of it. It was just, yeah, she did that. I mean, any one of us would be, oh shit, put that on my resume, But, well, she didn't have a resume, but but people just knew her as a nice person who was an artist, a good cook, lots and lots of grandchildren, and she was happy with that. And she was that just meant a lot to me in terms of modesty and just being herself. Well, I'm going to try to find something here, and this has to do with Gizmos. My buddy Joe Bryan there is probably shaking his head and saying, come on, you can do it. And don't turn on the screen yet, because you'll see a bunch of stupid pictures up there. Not yet. I'm going to do something, let's see. Okay. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can put it on now. So I was talking about these objects, right, that are in museums. And you'll notice I go not A to B in a linear way. It's this A and all over the place to B. But we've been looking at objects in different museums and finding how there's so much information that's wrong with them. And this may be difficult for you to see. This is kind of a standard, using standard nomenclature in museology and collections work about, it says an ID number, kind of all the accession information about it. It's made out of wood, agricultural, cultural group, that sort of thing. And what we're doing is we're going to look at objects, and we're working with images of those objects and then exposing our own people, Zuni people, to them and say, well, what do you think this is? And people would say, well, it's a tasaquin. It's a planting stick in Zuni. And they may say, well, we make it out of this wood, or we make it out of that wood, or my uncle made it this way. Or it can also be jewelry, it can be a ceramic, it can be many different things, but people would say, oh, the Zuni name for it is this or that. And this is what we do with it, and this is how I made it, or so on and so on. And we were comparing it with the standard museum definitions And on the right, for example, it has ID numbers and certain, like a source, place, cultural group, keywords. And on the left side is a Zuni sort of ceremonial, personal narratives, modern uses, stories, and sort of things like that. And what we're working to do now is actually trying to create a new kind of catalog. And I would say it's like creating a collaborative catalog. And I say collaborative because many times museums or other places with collections would say, come tell us what we got. And we're saying now, well, you got to pay for us to come tell you what you got. And it's got to be a two-way street, not a one-way street. And so what we want to do is we tell them, you got to give us a catalog, we'll review it, then we'll come look at the pieces, identify them, and we want you to create new windows in your catalog software or database. Now there's three things that can happen. One is either it can work smooth and people will jump up and down and say, that's brilliant, and many do. Or sometimes the staff will say, well, that's not the way we do things. We limit the kind of access to certain scholars, and there's a process for this. And I don't waste my time with those people. I say, okay, we'll go to another museum. So people can kind of get in the way of doing new things. The other thing that can happen is just literally the technology. So sometimes the software, people might be using collections museum software like PastPerfect, Argus, FileMaker Pro, things like this. And we tell them, well, we're going to go there and look at the objects and tell you what it is, but we want to insert Zuni comments in that catalog description. And some people say, well, if we do that, then it's going to screw it up for the whole museum, because then it's going to affect the way the gems are identified and the insects and all these sort of things in the other departments of the museum. And kind of finding excuses, it's too hard. And I think that's a kind of, we have bureaucracies, and that's an example of technocracies. And then the third thing is really, is like standards and certain policies. And I told people today, I think standards are fine for things like the way airplanes are put together and electricity and that sort of thing. I think we need standards like that. But we don't have to have standards that are so rigid that people say, no, we can't change it, we can't do it differently. We got to follow the international nomenclature or an international congress of collections nomenclature or something, and Zuni language doesn't fit into the certain keywords that we use for this, and that's where we say, okay, you're not going to work with us. But we can work with museums that do want to do this, museums or national monuments or parks. There's people who do want to do this, and it's exciting. What we're doing now, next, I guess it's almost like a Web 2 kind of a thing, where I wouldn't call it blogging on an object, but we can have the images at Zuni from the collections, and I can look at it and say what I write about it. Somebody else from Zuni, artists can come in and write what they know about it, and we just keep building. It's an additive development around the body of knowledge around particular objects, and just keeps growing and growing. But then we can electronically send that back to the museum. But we, as a source community, we want to maintain the control. It's about power, control. We want to control and literally license back information to the museums. And so the table is changing now. So we have a lot of information that we can provide, and museums now are saying, will you work with us, please, we'll pay you, and it's in the best interest of both sides, and that's what I call creating collaborative catalogs. Okay, if you can turn that off again. Amber, where does Amber go? I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I know Joe Bryan's going to get really excited about. He was just over there almost crying. Okay, you can turn that on. That's lame. That was, some people like that, but it gets people too sleepy. Identity, again, there's so many things. It's kind of a slippery word in the same way traditional is. People say, Jim, are you a traditional farmer? And I say, well, I don't know. When they say, what kind of traditional, what do you eat traditional foods? And I say, well, traditionally on Friday I like to eat pizza. So it's that slippery word, traditional. It really is. But I think it's what's inside of you. When I get my field ready and I say my prayers and I plant my prayer sticks and I do what I need to do for my field and I talk to my plants in Zuni, I take care of my dosho, I take care of all my seeds and things like that. I do all the right things in a way that my grandma taught me, whatever, if you want to call it traditional, whatever, but I'm doing it in a way that I think is right and the way it was taught to me, that my grandma was taught and her grandma was taught. If I use a tractor, if I use a shovel that happens to have a steel blade on it or a hoe, does that mean I'm not traditional? I think it's just what's inside of me that makes it traditional. Then when I think about when I talk with people about places and people ask about, well, what's the traditional homelands of the Zuni people? Or any other peoples, really, for that matter. I say, well, you'd have to talk with them. You have to go to the source. And when I looked at maps, and my friend Joe is here, Joe Bryan, if you ever have a chance to talk with him about maps, he's pretty hip. He knows about this stuff more than I do. But I've been just a person that's been, I guess, a critical thinker about maps ever since I was a kid. In the same way I've been interested in museums and how they discipline our thinking. And we've been thinking about this, and with Joe also, we've been thinking about maps as how powerful they are. They're very powerful. And maps can lie, maps can distort. You can inflate property values by making a map. You don't have to have a license to make a map. Maps are very arbitrary. They inform this and not that. Does anybody know why Portuguese is spoken in Brazil and Spanish is spoken on the other side of South America? Who knows? Come on.
Or Brasilia.
The Pope drew a line on the map?
The Pope arbitrarily drew a line and said, this side Portuguese, this side Spanish. Just a line. And perhaps more lands may have been lost through mapping than maybe through armed conflict. So just think about that when you go home and it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Man, Jim was right. Maps. But maps are really powerful, really, really powerful. And like I said, they can distort, they can lie, but they are also very useful and very persuasive. And there's all kinds of map making out there. You can have the Rand McNally maps or the maps you buy at the gas station, things like that. And there's GIS maps you made with GPS kind of gizmos. And I was before working, I was a department head for natural resources. Charles and his very embroidered introduction of me. Thank you, Charles. But yeah, I was doing a lot of work in natural resources, and my background is in farming. I don't know why I'm a museum director now, but I did work a lot with maps, and we did have a whole division that was devoted to creating maps with computers. And I know Joe talks about this, my friends, but we joke and say, well, those GIS maps are kind of the HUD housing of cartography. But we respect them very much. They're very important for working with engineers to archaeologists and biologists to fisheries people and so on. Within those disciplines, they work wonderfully. They're great. They're very effective and persuasive, and you probably would use them in court too. But when I show my mom or my cousins or my nephews and the nieces, they look at it and go, well, so what? What is it? Something's shaded and something isn't, and well, what's that supposed to mean? And that just got me thinking. And I do a lot of painting, and my family does a lot of art. And I thought, well, what's a denominator in Zuni? And I thought, well, art, for one thing. It's kind of an innate thing. And so what if we what if we made maps and used artists to make the maps? And we inserted artists and cultural advisors in the mapping process. My experience with other kinds of mapping, you have technicians who know the keystrokes, and basically you have a gatekeeper of that geographic information. Wonderful information, but you have a gatekeeper. You have just a few people controlling that. What if we created maps that can be used and are accessible to everybody, and do it through art? And so, with that spark, and the power of a million other new ideas, we got some advisors together and some artists together, and we sat down for over a year to negotiate just making 3 maps. And at the front of all of that, the front of that process was what not to map. Because people would say, well, we don't want everybody to know about that shrine or this shrine, because in Zuni, knowledge is very segregated. People are initiated into one group. I'm initiated into Upsala. I'm part of that Kiva group. I'm not initiated into rain priesthood. I'm not initiated into different ones. And so I don't have access to that knowledge. It's kept by small groups. Some people would say, well, why don't you want to have all your knowledge shared and you can maintain it better that way? I think it's better maintained when it's in small groups that keep it secret and maintained. They say the prayers over and over and over, and it's verbatim and it doesn't change year after year after year. The small group controls it and keeps it that way. I think if it was broader knowledge, people would say, well, I think we're supposed to do it on this day after this moon, and well, I heard we're supposed to do it this way, and pretty soon the knowledge gets kind of distorted. So I believe in keeping knowledge segregated that way. So anyway, the advisor would say, we're going to create maps, but we have to be careful not what to put on them, what not to put on them. That was at the front, what not to map. Then we began this thing. But let me introduce you to some things. And actually, Joe, you've seen these before too. Let's see. This is their standard kind of map with, what is it, Mercator? I don't know who these guys are, I forget. But you know, those maps that you saw in mid-school or high school that, you know, the things were distorted to try to fit around the globe. I always thought those were really weird, and I think that's where I got interested in maps. With lines and more distortions there. Some maps, this one around near Santa Fe, for some reason, like why are Forest Service or federal lands green and tribal lands have a purple outline? And it's also just too busy. It's just got too much stuff going on there too. Just sort of aesthetically, I don't like it. Maps can be conceptual in some ways too. I mean, it doesn't have to be. You have to let go of your notion of what a map is. It can be something that's in your mind, or like in baskets or pottery. There's usually these places. Oh, I can't reach up there. This is right there. But there's a place for that energy or that spirit to get out, and it's sort of a minimalist way of telling us and reflecting how we order knowledge in our head. You know, how we put, I read that book today and it's back here, and let's see, the fire is on for my frying eggs is over here. I better put that over here in the front. We order our knowledge too, and maps kind of do it in the same way. And even art, it's reflecting and showing how we perceive the world, how we move things. It does that too. I always thought the Nazca lines might be some kind of a map for aliens. I might be wrong. This is one that we got out of a book. Am I supposed to cite it? I don't know. But anyway, they can come get me. In Zuni. But this one is a wooden piece. It's a three-dimensional piece of art that people would use in the Arctic area as they're navigating around some islands. I don't know if they're kayaks or what, but kind of cruising around and hold it up and say, oh, we're over here in this inlet, this cove. This is another one, a wooden piece. It's three-dimensional maps. And this one is a Polynesian stick map. These the nodes there are shells, and the sticks are like currents and tides, so it's like used for helping to understand and learn and about navigating between different islands. Another one. By the way, I saw a whole collection of these in Osaka, Japan. It was amazing. They had a bunch of them there. I was amazed. Which brings up another point. You know, there were so many of those shell maps at that museum. I wondered how many of them are still left in Polynesia. There were so many there. And actually, there were. We were looking at Zuni baskets. We wanted to do some work around reviving Zuni basketry, and people were saying, "The Zunis don't really make baskets." And I said, "Well, I've seen a whole bunch of them in catalogs," and so they're at different museums. And then it dawned on me too. I was looking at some really beautiful, tightly woven. You would think that they were made in southern Arizona baskets, but they were from Zuni. I thought, wow, Zunis made this? Yeah. And then it dawned on me, I thought, so these were the models for teaching different new generations of basket makers of how to make those. But now they've all been collected. No wonder we don't make those anymore. This is a tapestry from Australia. It's a kind of a map also. And so we've always had maps. Yeah, everybody's going like this. Now you got to go this way. Well, we've always had maps. It's just that over the past 500 years we've been remapped. And so many places that would have been called Sunakunkyapachayalani or Chimikyanicatea or Tewakunkyapachayalani. Now they are Grand Canyon, San Francisco Peaks, Mount Taylor. And so with the English and Spanish names, basically maps, conventional maps today, have really overlooked, ignored, or purposefully left us off. So this is our chance to, and our opportunity to counter map, to make maps in our terms. And we can do that electronically, or in the case what I'll be showing you is making maps through art. This is one made by a fellow at Santa Clara Pueblo, and he was making, like showing where he used to go hunt, things like that. I thought it was pretty cool. This is a panel from a large map art at Zuni. And this is how we use it. And one of our staff is talking with kids in Zuni and saying, this is the story of where we emerged at the Grand Canyon, which is up in the upper left, and how we sought our middle place, our own center of the world. Like many cultures have their own center of the world, we began to seek our center as well. And that could be literally a physical place, but it can also be finding our own collective truth. We all seek our own individual truth, but also I think as peoples we select or search for our collective truths, and that's what we were doing. But this panel, this map, tells that. And the kids come in and they hear that story. This is out at Zuni, a dryland field there. Now, look in the background, you see those spires sticking up? So there, you'll see that again pretty soon, in a different way. So we started creating map art, and we find them very evocative. People are useful. Kids were making them too. This is one of the first pieces that we commissioned. This one was done by Edward Wimaitua. And so the advisors got together and said, the young people are singing about this place, we say this and that prayer, but we know it's a mountain, but we're not sure where. And so we told the artists, the first map, let's do it a regional place. And I don't have the pointer, but way up in the upper left would be the Grand Canyon. And all way in the upper right is Santa Fe area. And there's a little glow in the horizon. There's represents that Bandelier Monument place. And then there's the mountains near Albuquerque and other mountains. And all the way down towards the Zuni Salt Lake over here, which is, you'll see another piece of art around that. And so when we have these exhibited at our place, the Ashri Awan Museum in Zuni, people come in, families will come in, and they look at it, and first thing they do is they say, they think, wow, it's really nice, it's pretty, it's just nice to look at. And then they look at it and they go, oh, and they recognize this as the Koyamshi mother, it represents a time at the winter solstice, and there's kind of this side and that side, and they say, oh, okay, and what's this down here? Oh, Makyaya, that's the salt lake and the salt woman. And then they start, oh, and then somebody in the family says, this is when we were here, and this is when we were there, and this river goes back to there, and that's the snow-capped peak by Flagstaff, Yalawe. And yeah, as I said, it's very evocative. People start talking, oh, that's really interesting. So it starts as people look at it and go, wow, that's really beautiful. Then, oh, there's something going on here. It's not only technically a beautiful thing to look at, and like the brush strokes and the colors, but it also it incorporates, I should say, sensibilities that people at home can relate to. And you can't see it back there, but I can barely see it where I'm at. But there's, at some point we said, well, we should make posters of these, and we did. We made posters, and remember I was saying how it took over a year to the group of cultural advisors and the artists to what not to map, what areas to paint and map, what should be on them, what should be on them, and on and on and on. And then when we got to this part, also, by the way, art by community is a bitch. It's hard. Because the artists will be like, okay, here it is. And then the advisors say, oh, you should put that thing on it. Okay. And they go back and they paint some more. And they come back and show it. Not that big. Okay. Paint it again, and then it's really, really hard to have artists work with a community, a committee to do things. But then we had we wanted to put the names of places on there, the place names, and again, it's like not just any place. That we had to really negotiate that. We started putting those on there, and then of course it dawned on us like, how do you spell that? How do you spell Sun Hakun Kyapa Chuyala? And then it began this more like another 2 months of negotiating, because then it was, is it Sun Hakun Kyapa Chuyalani or Sun Hakun Kyapa Chuyalawe? Is it plural or singular? And we said, well, there's a group of mountains there, so it's Sun Hakun Kyapa Chuyalawe. Okay. What about Dewan Kun Kapachu? And then, so it was like, oh, geez. Okay, what do we get ourselves into? But we had, fortunately, some Zunis that are our advisors, too, who are really into the spelling. Zuni is only very recently a written language. It's never been written until, I think, sometime in the 70s. But not many people can write it. I can't write it. I can't even read it, but I'm kind of like the hooked on phonics when I looked at it. Soon. I don't know how the kids do it, but they're learning. And there's a lot of debate about whether writing a language is helpful in teaching the language. We're fortunate at Zuni, I hear statistics somewhere, I don't know, it's pretty broad, but I hear between 34 and 74% fluency of speaking at Zuni. And we're fortunate that way. But I can't read it. But anyway, but there's debate whether writing really helps. There's many Zunis that say the only way you can learn a language is at home. Really, you can't learn the language at school. All you're going to learn is the numbers and colors and things like that, and which really isn't relevant to day-to-day life. The way to learn a language is at home. When you're talking about, it itches here, or I stepped on something, or that kind of way of using the language. That's the way to learn it. As I said, we're fortunate because practically every household, especially my generation up, it's our first language. So most kids these days, at least in their homes, they can hear it and do it that way. But anyway, going back to the spelling, that was really tough because some people too would say, well, you say it this way, but you live in the middle village and I live on the south side of the river and we say it this way. And so that all had to be negotiated. But we finally did. And we put it on and we distributed sets of these to every household. This one, remember that salt lake I was telling you about? This is a painting representing the journey of the salt woman. And as I said too, again, there's colors and other things going on in here that many people may not understand. You can appreciate the art technically. Zunis will do that and see something else in there too. This is representing the Bandelier Monument area, if any of you are familiar with it. But there's a lot going on there too. You can see a little, I'm pointing to the screen here. There's even upper left, like, you can see it. But there's even an upper left, there's like the kola we see, plume serpent up there. This one is a watercolor. And again, the detail is difficult to see, but this is our relationship to the tribes along the Rio Grande River. And the artist here really included a lot of the Spanish revolt themes in there. We thought like there was one image in there where the Indians were giving the Spanish a wedgie, but I think they were actually, but they were cutting his head off or something. But it's a really interesting piece. And this one's a watercolor, and all these arts are big too. They're like this big. They're large pieces. So many people think Zunis, they usually just silver and turquoise jewelry, but there's some very talented three-dimensional and two-dimensional artists there. Now this one is a map piece of the relationship to the oceans. And a lot of people will tell me and others at Zuni, well, I don't think Zunis went to the oceans. And I'd say, well, that's what our history says. We tell ourselves we've been to the ocean and we collect water at the ocean. And we've heard a lot of people, archaeologists and others, ethnographers, say, that's too far. And I think, well, didn't Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan and all these other people traverse all continents and all over the place? I said, from Zuni to the ocean is probably only 3 months walk or 6 months walk, so why not? And so our stories talk about going to the ocean and collecting water in gourds and bringing back shells and things like that, which is represented here. And these are people at the oceanside saying prayers and giving their kiawe, their cornmeal. And this from Zuni to the Grand Canyon and then down to, like, what is it, Sea of Cortez? Yeah. I would say Baja, but I don't know. This one is a map of wells in the village, the Zuni village, the old wells. We tell kids in the school sometimes, like, well, if your tap suddenly stopped, where would you get water? Of course you would go to springs, but did you know that there's old wells in Zuni, also in the old village area? And there are. So this artist drew his map of wells in the old village area, like the hand-dug wells. This artist drew rendering of the flood, and many cultures around the world have the story of floods, and Zuni does too. And ours was that the water was rising and rising. I'm telling you these stories that are like hours long, but this is the 1 minute version. But the water was rising and rising, and it overcame the village, and people had to retreat to the top of the mountain. And the at the same time, the Kolowisi, the plumed serpent, was taking bites out of the land and was threatening the people. And so the head rain priest gave some very special things to, he sacrificed his daughter and son, and they went into the water, and the water then went down. And they became those spires that you saw in that image before. But I remember many years ago looking through some National Geographic magazine and seeing Kolowisi, our serpent, in the National Geographic, and it was Mayan, the Mayan ruins. And I said, whoa, that's just exactly like ours. So I saved some money and I flew down to Merida, and then I took a bus to Cancun and then to Chetumal, and I hitchhiked to Guatemala, and then I saw the same ones. And I said, wow, that's awesome. You know? This one is a map of the Zuni River Valley looking upstream. And this is an example, too, of north doesn't have to be at the top. This is, actually the top is east in this one. But the artist did one that has, the Zuni River Valley has, again, elements in there that Zuni say, oh, I see. But also the advisors, this is another one of those things where the artists and advisors were like, okay. But the artist did some things here and showed it to the advisors, and the advisor said, we want you to put water beings in there, creatures, animals that are related to water, like the turtles and certain fish and birds and things. And the artist said, okay. But then the advisors were saying this one and this one and this one and this one, like about 50 different birds. And so the artist said, wait. The artist's aesthetic had to come in too. It's like, if I do too many, it's going to be too busy. It's not going to look cool. But they negotiated and agreed, and then came out like this. This one is by one of our younger artists, and this was a certain place in the Grand Canyon near Ribbon Falls. This one is around the reservation area. And again, there's things in there that people would see and recognize. What I really like about this project too is that you really see all the different characteristics and just the difference between the different artists' work. This one is of the Zuni village area. And the artist here said, well, how am I going to get the whole town in my canvas like that? And then we said, just forget about scale. Don't worry about that. We just want you to do the middle village area and certain kivas and certain places in the village and certain trails. And the artist said, oh, okay. And what we did too is a friend of mine has an airplane, and he came out and flew the artist around too. I forgot to add that. Flew the artist around, and one artist was saying, well, I just watched that, what's that singer's name that crashed and died in the airplane? I forget. One of those. It was like Buddy Holly or one of those. What was the Spanish guy's name too? Who? Richie Valens. Yeah. The artist was saying, I just saw that movie last night, and you want me to go fly in this little airplane, and we flew around. But for the artist, they could look down and see more oblique angles, because again, we said if you can make a map like this, it's not looking straight down like a standard map. It's like if you're way up high. And so the artist got that perspective when we went up in an airplane. This one is the relationship to the people south. We have stories about a group of Zunis, because there was movement, but of course, but some people went south, and they followed a macaw. They say there were eggs, a couple of eggs that the people encountered, and one of them was more brightly colored, and it hatched out, and it was like a crow or a raven. And then the other people were nurturing another egg that was less, it was kind of plain colored, and it hatched out and started flying south, and it was brightly colored, like a macaw. And they followed that one south, and we say those are our brothers and sisters who went south. And we say, well, those people still have our blood in them there. And we think maybe, and I tried to listen to some people down south there, and I thought, kind of sounds like Zuni, but I didn't want to stretch it too much. But there's a story of that. So like here's the artist's rendition of me. No, it's not. But, a Zuni and then somebody south. And so it's that relationship, and it's another form of a map. And this one is the Four Corners area, and there's so many. I can't go through all of them, but just wanted to show you that there's our people had spent time and followed all the tributaries from the Grand Canyon where we emerged, and followed all the tributaries of the Colorado River up into Utah and Colorado, what is now Utah and Colorado, and spent time there and moved on. Again, searching for the middle. And I think that's it with those. We'll turn on the lights again. Who has the magic wand for that? Well, there's many ways, obviously, to represent. Representation is important. There's obviously many ways to represent our identity, and some of it is through art like this, through maps, or some of it has to do with how we're represented in museums, in schools, and textbooks, and things like that. And it's difficult sometimes. I don't want to say everything's difficult. Sometimes it's very fun and it's easy. Like I said, I have the best job in the world, I think, right now. But I think when I'm here and I'm messing around with this Gizmo, and I think this jump drive or whatever, these things plug in this way or doesn't. And I was telling some people today, I said, it's like we're riding horses Roman style. You know, we got one foot on this horse here, this old style, you know, saying our prayers and doing the right thing, and then the other foot is on this other horse, and we're cruising along and trying not to fall off, but we're living in these two worlds. And what does that do to for us trying to deal with identity? But I think that it's in many cases, for many people, whether they are African American, Asian American, and things like that, we're always searching for our own truth. But to get to the truth, we have to get to as local as possible. I mean, local. I was going to show you something here, but I don't think we have time for it. How much time do we have, anyway? Because I know people want to throw eggs or whatever later on, too.
We're enjoying ourselves, I think. So.
Oh, okay.
So maybe, I don't know, what, 10 minutes more?
Sure. Well, when I think of identity, too, I think about just an innate desire to make sense of where I am and who I am. And it begins first with looking towards the inside, defining myself. And that's what I meant by finding a truth. And finding a truth is just really about trying to avoid some bad things over there, whether you want to call it bad energy, or maybe you see some cars over there, the people don't look quite right over there. I'm not going to go knock on the window. I'm going to go that way. Or I'm going to make certain decisions this morning about I better not drink coffee because I'll get all wired and I'll act goofy, and I don't want to do that. So I make these decisions all day long about doing the right thing. And I think that was very much about what our ancestors were like. Everybody's ancestors. My grandparents' generation knew hunger. They really knew hunger, the real thing. The kind of crying hunger. And my grandma used to make grasshoppers for us when we were kids. We used to collect locusts or whatever, grasshoppers, but she used to soak them in salt water and then roast them and say, here, along with her cooking other things. But she said, yeah, but actually they're not that bad. They're kind of like that, amaibi, the shrimp heads when they're deep fried. It's kind of like that. They're good, actually. But I think they'd be even better if you were really hungry. But not to make fun of my grandma starving, but in those days, and I think to now, we should be thinking about these day-to-day decisions that go back and reflect on our ancestors' identity. Our ancestors' identity was about making decisions that were for the collective whole, about for the family. Is it the right thing to do or not? They're really ethically based, like is it right or not? Because sometimes it was really hard. Sometimes it was, do I feed these children? Do I not feed them? I'll feed them, but then we don't eat. There are some really difficult decisions that were going on, and we raise crops, and I work to teach kids farming also. And the kids ask, well, what does this have to do with our culture and our identity and things like that? And I say, if you look at the corn, and like Charles was saying, we've been talking about, I say, well, everything comes from a seed. Whether it's us or a deer or a sequoia tree or a whale or grass or bamboo, everything comes from a seed. And if you take care of those seeds and you plant them and nourish them, then they germinate, they sprout, then you got a little baby. Just like we have little baby people. And we tell the kids, watch out, because the same way you got to hold a baby's head when it flops around like that, you got to be real careful with it. And when they're watering them, I say, no, don't just splash them with water. Be real gentle with them. Talk to them. Sometimes this one had a little bit less. You can say, oh, I'm sorry. We'll share the water with you. Don't worry. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to make it. And oh, I'm sorry. It looks like some grasshopper ate you, but no, you'll be all right. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. And so the kids come and they go to their gardens and they they talk to their plants and they say, yeah, and do it like you mean it. Say it with passion. Really, do you mean it? Because they are. We say, you planted them. We tell the kids, you planted them. Now they're babies, and now that you've planted them, you're a parent and you're responsible until they die. And so they watch the little crops grow and they take care of them, and pretty soon they get a little bigger. We tell them, oh, they're like teenagers now. They're really growing robustly. And the kids say, how come this one's taller and this one's littler? And we say, well, look at you guys. Some of you are bigger and some smaller. They're all different sizes. I said, they're just like people. They're just like you. And then pretty soon they flower and then they start making corn. And then the kids ask, this is blue corn, but how come there's one little white in there, one white corn or a yellow in there? And I said, well, it's grandma or great grandpa was probably a yellow corn somewhere. And I said, oh, is that why Curtis is so goofy? Is that why he has? That's why he's like, yeah. That's why you look the way you do. I said, they're just like people, and pretty soon they have this corn, and we harvest it, and then the plant dies, and we say, see, it's just like you. Can you identify with that? And they say, oh yeah. So we got to take care of them all the way through the whole cycle. And they think about it. Gee. Yeah, it is. And they think and they think and they think. Well, when I was talking about how we don't have the liberties that we did when we get upset with each other, we say, I just can't identify with the way you're living. I'm not going to argue. We're going to move on. And what we have now are the reservations, and we stay in one place. We don't have the liberty to move over the other side of the mountain, down the canyon or down the river. And so we have this kind of compression. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that with compression comes energy. And so I'm hopeful that while we can't move on down the roads, that compression will lead to some good things. And I think, when I think about time compression, I think sometimes don't we think that, wow, the time is really compressed tonight. And when you're having a good time and you're enjoying yourself, time flies, doesn't it? So thank you very much. I have enjoyed talking with you.
A few questions?
Sure. Questions where I got this thing, I can do like sham wow. Or I should be like cutting stuff. You know?
Do that. There's a fellow just right over here.
Yes, sir.
Is it Jim or elder?
Elder, no, I don't like elder. But you know, people will sometimes say we should invite elders to this meeting, or let's consult the elders. And sometimes I say, that dumbass doesn't know anything. He's older than me, but just because he's an elder doesn't necessarily mean he knows a lot of things. He may have experience, but you know, there's sometimes in my religious group, there's some very young leaders. Some of our religious leadership are in their 20s and 30s. So, of course, please respect my experience, and I respect my elders' experience. But sometimes just being an elder doesn't necessarily mean you know all the things collectively about knowledge. But
I have an easy question.
Okay.
Well, kind of easier, but just the shamanism side of the Zuni religion. I know in some Indian tribes they have, I guess is it peyote or that's kind of strong as far as shamanism is concerned. I was noticing that the card that was mailed out was talking a little about the shamanism side, and so that's kind of an easy kind of thing. If you could talk about herbs and how they may apply to shamanism, rather than me asking all sorts of technical questions about that and all that. But that was kind of it's like medical marijuana now is really big in Colorado. So.
I can tell you about that.
Okay, so you might restate the question.
I can tell you about medical marijuana, but I'll tell you.
They say growing at high elevation makes it really potent. So.
Well.
So could you
the
restate
question
that?
is about plants and shamanism and what do I know about that. If I had a guitar here, I could tell you. I would begin with nothing. I don't know about the plants and things like that because the medicines and that thing is controlled by certain groups, and I can't say I want to grow up and be a shaman or something. I can't. It doesn't work that way. The medicine societies pick you. They decide you, and then they initiate you, and then of course you have to be Zuni. You have to speak Zuni. They have to have known you forever, and they have to think you're the right person. And then they initiate you into their group. And there's more than one medicine society. Like there might be Newequis, and there might be all these different galaxy societies, and they all have their particular knowledge. Maybe they specialize in the mind or bones or something, but you have to be initiated into that. You got to be deep Zuni. You have to be able, like you are Zuni, speaking Zuni, lived in Zuni. Then they initiate you, and then it's secret. And everything is super, super secret. And I think it's good that way. It's controlled and maintained, and it stays the same way year after year after year. So I don't have access to that. Sometimes we're out doing some work, and we're walking around in the fields, and sometimes I might say, oh, what's that one? And one of my friends who's one of the medicine groups, medicine societies, he'll say, if I tell you, I'm going to have to initiate you. and I say, no, because it's a really big responsibility. When somebody's initiated into a Kiva group, that's a big responsibility as it is. We got to do certain things, there's certain things that go on, and it involves the whole family. It takes a lot of time, a lot of time and effort. And of course you have to be there in Zuni and living in Zuni. And then if you're initiated into a medicine society, it's that much more. And then if you're initiated to both rain priesthood, it's that much more. Then if you're initiated in Quaint, it's pretty soon it's like you don't have a regular job. You're just serving the people with your religious obligations. And that's the way it works. So long story is I don't know.
It can also be fasting and prayer rather than not taking something, you just don't do something.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to get more questions.
Yeah. Oh, yes, sir.
You are proof that there is knowledge beyond books.
Oh, thank you.
You are proof that there is knowledge beyond the printing press, and I thank you for coming to teach tonight. My question is this.
Thank you, sir.
You have my respect.
Oh, thanks.
My question is this, when you went to these museums,
Yeah.
especially at Cambridge, could you believe just how many specimens they had of our people? How we went from enemies to specimens, from enemies to displays, from enemies to exhibits? And could you bring any of them back home under reparations? Because I know the British have in particular been very resistant. The Zist University itself, 2 springs ago, finally acknowledged that they had our remains in their shoeboxes here, and finally reparated over 1,500 remains to Mesa Verde in a sacred place. They haven't graduated that many Indian people in the history of this school. So I think we should change that there from the center of American West to the center of the American and indigenous West, and Zuni West, because we are still here.
Right.
So my question is, were you surprised to see how much of that was there?
Oh, yeah, there are lots of things.
Oh, thousands and thousands.
Thousands of things there.
Could you bring them home? Could you touch them?
Well, you know, well, first when we go to those kind of places, whenever we go to a collection center, we ask, are there any human remains in this building, in this room? And if they say, yeah, we have some in the back over there, we say, I'm sorry, we can't go in. Or if they say, no, we keep them in a different building, we say, okay. So for one thing, there's just a lot of stuff, everything from just little tiny pot shards and thing. And the sad thing is sometimes they're just thrown in big boxes, they're not sorted out. But things that were taken include infants. And we have lists that's human remains, like adults, middle age, young adults, infants, things like that, just dug up, you know. And it's a quandary for us because, and it's handled differently by different tribes, but it's a quandary for us. And myself working in the museum, I'm asked this sort of thing many times, and people say, are we going to get them back? And I said, well, it's really not my place to say for us to take them back. Some people will say, we have burial ceremonies, but we don't have reburial ceremonies. That they've had the burial ceremony and they've been sent on their path, and it's very unfortunate, but what happened. And then some people say that, and we don't know who they are. And we don't know if they were really mean people, because there's mean Zunis maybe, you know. We don't know if they were nice, good people. We don't know if they were bad people. We don't know if they were witches, because, you know, we didn't have gravestones, things like that. They were just sent on their way. So this real quandary for us is like, well, we don't know who they are. And if we repatriate them, where should they go? Well, like Mesa Verde is an appropriate place because it's not necessarily where we live, but it's an ancestral place for them. But it just shouldn't have happened in the first place. And we're trying to make the best of it, but some of it does have to do with we don't know who they are. Or even some things that are maybe funerary objects. Some people say we should bring them back and have them in a museum so our young people can see the brilliance of the art or the brilliance of the things that they made. And we say, well, we don't know who they belong to. You know, that not to say that there's a lot of bad Zunis, but I mean, like, imagine if there was something, I don't know, in Cambodia, what if it was Pol Pot's watch bands or something, you know? Not to make light of those things, but, you know, you don't know. Do you want that thing in your house? It's just a quandary, and it's just sad that it just should never have happened in the first place. But I think the students here and educators here, this is the next generation of museology, the next generation of dealing with this, rather than you know, kind of sweeping it under and saying, well, we have standards, so we have policies, and that's not the way we do things. But guess what? Now is the time to do that. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What's your policy on, or how does someone study, you know, anthropology at these schools, you know, about outsiders who want to learn more about the Zunis? What do they do?
There's a long history. You know, some of it is good, some of it is comical. The question is about, if you heard it, was about what's the relationship and history and background of ethnographers, anthropologists, things like that. And well, back in the 1800s, there were people from Smithsonian and other places sent out to the Southwest to gather information and collect lots of things. For one thing, too, they were afraid of being out collected by Europeans. There's a very substantial amount of things from the Americas that are in Europe. And they started collecting way before Smithsonian did, way before many of the universities in the U.S. were started. There was already heavy collecting going on by Europe. So sometimes people think about things being in U.S. museums, but I mean, it could be half of the things from the Americas are in Europe. So I mean, the point you made about repatriation, it's getting a foothold in the U.S., but it's not global yet. So there's still a long ways to go in that area. But relationships with those early anthropologists and folks, they were afraid of being out collected for one thing, but they also thought we were going to be extinct soon, and so they were busy trying to collect and learn things. And they also tended to, from what our history, what people say is they would kind of barge in on things that they shouldn't have gone into and seen and sketched and started taking photos and things like that. And people didn't like that. And I mean, that's a whole nother story. I could talk a whole night just on photography, for example, and representation in that way and misrepresentation. But the relationships were, I think people say it was just odd, like a curiosity. Like, who are these people? And some of these guys would dress up, like some of you probably know Cushing, Frank Cushing, was one of the very early practitioners of, participatory observation. And he used to dress up, try to dress up like a Zuni and all that kind of stuff. He kind of looked like a hippie to me, but people would say, yeah, they were here and he tried to learn Zuni, but he didn't quite know Zuni. And there's different stories about it, but they say they were writing things down that they shouldn't have been writing down. They were told not to talk about things, and they did. And basically there's backlash from it. And so now people are really, really hesitant to talk with people from outside. And it could be around photography, it can be around talking about places, it can be about, I didn't mean to disrespect, I'm not saying I don't know about, I don't know about Zuni medicine, but people in Zuni, some people would say, don't ask me that. Some people are really, really conservative these days because of that. They say, I don't want to talk about it, don't ask me that. But, so I think overall probably hasn't been a good, it hasn't had a happy ending. I think there's still a lot of work, and I think fortunately that, there's some young native anthropologists now out there too who have that sort of riding two horses at once experience. And saying, well, I know what I can ask, and I know where my limits are and the boundaries are. And those young native anthropologists, archaeologists that do a lot for us, they can understand the context much deeper on a different level. And of course, if they're coming from home, they can have access to different information that other people outside may not. So I think I'm hopeful. Yeah. So we'll take another question there. Yes, ma'am.
It's clear in your work that you are talking about the relationship of the native people to the land, but what I really enjoyed is that you talked about the relationship to place, because that's sometimes hard to articulate how places form the conceptualization of the worldview. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
About place?
About place. Because in your maps you have place.
Yeah.
Too, not just land.
Well, a big reason we're making these kinds of maps is we want the world, not only Zuni, but much of the world, to not see the world as only a physical entity. I mean, when you look at maps, or many people see the Grand Canyon or mountains, they think, it's beautiful. Yes, I recognize that too. There's the geology, the geomorphology, the plant communities, there's the wildlife and those sort of things. And I want people to see the world as not just a physical entity, but I want them to see the world as a cultural landscape. And that's what I think this map art helps to do. Its place is very relevant, obviously, to our culture. Yes, sir.
Does the map art tend to include an element of time? It seemed a couple of them seemed to touch on that.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does many things, and time is one of them. And who was I talking with today? Daniel. We were talking about how this map art connect or advance understanding of the environment as well. And there are some places that are described. Well, I'm pointing up there. But there's places like Anchikyan, Bear Spring. It's a Bear Spring. But on today's maps, it's called Fort Wingate. And so, if we went backwards 200 years, we would call it Anchikyan. If we went forward 50 years or 200 years, if we were using our maps, we'd say Anchikyan is there. If we use the conventional kinds of maps, it would be Fort Wingate. And if we were to go there 50 years or 100 years, we look and go, oh, okay, well, everything's cool. But if a Zuni went there and said, it's called Anchikyan, a bear spring, we go there and say, where's the spring? Where's the spring? Where's the spring? Where's the spring?